The Clackamas County Board of Commissioners policy session this afternoon on June 22nd, 2021. Administrator Gary Schmidt, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Your first policy session today, Commissioners, is Anti-Displacement 101. We have staff from the Office of Equity and Inclusion to present with several outside guests. So Martine Koblenz, our County Equity and Inclusion Officer, if you please start and introduce our guests, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Martine Koblenz, she, her pronouns. I'm the County Equity and Inclusion Officer. Other staff in the room today, my colleagues are from the Department of Transportation and Development, Dan Johnson, Karen Burig, and Jamie Stasny, as well as Everett Wild County Administration. We're here before you this afternoon to discuss anti-displacement. From a report for the City of Vancouver, Washington, anti-displacement is defined as a set of goals and strategies used to mitigate the negative impacts of change in economic and physical conditions in neighborhoods with high concentrations of residents vulnerable to displacement. So today's policy session on anti-displacement is solely an informational educational session. Clackamas County has expressed interest in a conversation about displacement in our community for some time. In July of last year, Commissioner Paul Savas asked the board to discuss anti-displacement strategies at a future policy session. Last December, staff presented a high-level overview of displacement and shared a plan to have a longer informational session to hear from experts. So today, we're pleased to have 3 experts with us to present on displacement. We have Dr. Lisa Bates from Portland State University, who will share with us a high-level overview of displacement, its effects, and ways to mitigate the negative impacts. We have Nikatris Perkins, who is the Assistant Director of Social Equity at the Oregon Department of Transportation, who will be discussing how infrastructure can affect displacement. And finally, we have Carmen Madrid, Deputy Director of Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon, who will be addressing business displacement. These speakers will each present for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the remainder of the time for questions, comments, and discussions with you, the Board of County Commissioners. So with that, I'd like to ask Dr. Lisa Bates, who's here with us in person, to start her presentation, and thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, thank you, and thanks for having me. It's always really wonderful when an alumna from our program thinks, hey, that lady had something interesting or useful to share, and I appreciate it. I know our school, the Toulon School, is really committed to working with our local and regional partners to try to provide useful knowledge. So thank you for having me, and please feel free to contact me or any of my colleagues, really, for the kinds of information that you're looking for as a follow-up to today's conversation. So what I think about a lot is how can we meaning planners or public sector folks, achieve multiple goals at once. One, to welcome and accommodate newcomers as we grow, while we also support our long-term community members, our neighbors, and our business owners. And also recognize that all of our past policies haven't supported everyone equally. They haven't supported everyone to thrive. And that we also want to make sure that all of our community members are equally well suited as we proceed into the future. And this sort of connects into this paradigm, this equitable, inclusive development without displacement. A new sort of a framework to think about our public decision making and recognize the relationship between the public and the private market. So I'm going to say a couple of things about the paradox of development and displacement, who is most at risk, why we should care or care more, and then what can the public sector do about it. So if we click forward, sort of our paradox is that we, and I say we as a person who's trained as a planner and considers myself to be part of the public sector, we have goals of improving neighborhoods, of making commercial districts more vibrant, of increasing our economy and our development, and we want to create new opportunities, right? At the same time, we have to recognize that when we make places more attractive to newcomers, to outside investors, to those market actors that we want to attract, that this can sometimes lead to pushing out the folks who are here with us today. That prices go up, rents go up, and involuntarily, they can be displaced. And those community members then don't experience the improvements that they have been hoping for, they've been asking for, and wanting to enjoy as part of the community because they can't stay. We can go forward. So when we think about if we can go forward again, who is most at risk for displacement, and my work is primarily around housing, so I think a lot about residences, but also about businesses as well. Those folks who are already vulnerable in their housing are the people who are most at risk for being displaced when we intend, again, to improve places, but we don't put in place all of the safeguards that would support folks who are already most likely to have instability in their housing. Obviously, people who have low incomes and who are cost burden in their housing are at high risk, are very vulnerable to housing displacement. Renters who don't control the housing that they live in are vulnerable to buildings being sold or upgraded. Although homeowners who have low incomes or fixed incomes can also be vulnerable to displacement, and I think that's especially the case right now with COVID economic impacts for people if they can't access support with their mortgages. They may also be very vulnerable. People of color and immigrant-identified families are at risk with, again, our sort of the histories and realities of fair housing challenges and discrimination, less access in the housing market, and less savings and wealth to fall back on. Older folks who have fixed incomes can be very vulnerable in their housing, and people with disabilities, both because of economic challenges in terms of incomes and employment, but also because of a need in many cases for housing that is accessible, that supports a physical disability that's very limited and hard to come by. So all of those folks are the people that what I am most concerned about when I think about inclusion and equity in changing housing markets. Likewise, small businesses, especially those who are owned by folks with less access to funds, less access to multi-generational savings, are first-generation entrepreneurs, that kind of category of the minority, women, and emerging small businesses, those kinds of classifications would be vulnerable to displacement in commercial areas when rents go up in our business districts. And, again, those things are linked together. If you are a small business that serves a community and folks that you serve no longer live here, then your customer base isn't present, and that can undermine sales. And so those two sides of the coin are very much connected. I think that most of us care about all of these people, but we often don't, as a matter of the public sector, think beyond just the impacts to those individuals when we think about the challenges of development and growth. So going forward, I argue that we should care actually a lot more, that there are real costs to individuals, families, but also to communities when people are displaced from their home communities. We know that this is that involuntary housing instability is very damaging to continued employment, serious interruptions to working and the workforce. So for an adult person's income, for the businesses and commercial sectors that they're employed in, being displaced, having to move far distances away, having challenges with commutes is very disruptive to work. Housing instability is deeply, deeply damaging to children's educational attainment. And their ability to continue and thrive in school, which of course has effects throughout the life course in terms of their success in graduating from high school, moving on to bigger and better things, including Portland State University. Displacement has been linked to mental and physical health challenges. Dr. Mindy Fullylove, who's a community psychologist, likens this to root shock. When you pull up a plant in your garden by the roots and you plant it too shallowly, it doesn't ever thrive again as well. And that can happen when we disrupt people's lives and the communities that they live in. These, of course, aggregate up to communities and spillover effects on other systems. In particular, I'll note school systems dealing with children who move a lot, having to provide additional supports can be heavily affected by community displacement, and also our transportation system and our environmental quality, frankly. If people are experiencing a lot of mismatch between where they live and where they need to go, impacts on traffic and air quality as examples of systems. And in general, we know as we look across the country that income segregation and inequality is actually bad for regions. Places that have very wide disparities because of these systems' impacts don't do as well. They don't thrive as well. And so one of the phrases that's come up in the housing world is that, people who work here should be able to live here. So any of the kinds of jobs that we think of as supporting our everyday life, from a grocery store checker to a nurse to a teacher to the doctor at the hospital, should have a choice and access to live nearby and in our community with us as neighbors. So if we care a lot, what is it that we can do as a public sector, knowing that many of these changes take place in the private sector. In the public sector, we don't build housing, we don't set the prices, we're not telling a commercial landlord what rent to charge. We're kind of creating the conditions under which development is happening. And when we think about the public sector improvements that we're extending, be those a light rail stop, new sidewalks, parks, et cetera, we want to think about and understand and anticipate how is the private sector going to respond. If we can go click forward. So we think about this idea of development without displacement. When we first make a commitment to inclusion and to equity, we recognize that we need then to really engage. We no longer, I hope, in most places, plan from atop the ivory tower and look down in a GIS map and say we know what's best, but we have to actually communicate and work together with communities, business owners, and those folks who are doing development to understand what it is, what's their perspective on what's happening, what are their plans, what are their hopes and their visions for what's happening. And really recognizing the way that our public investments affect those choices and can affect those choices positively through understanding the outcomes so that we don't have unanticipated changes. We don't have a moment where we say, oh, we're so surprised that new housing development would come in and be so expensive that it would push people out. There's no reason that we should not be able to think about that happening in the future. So this kind of new paradigm, which I would describe as an inclusive and equitable development paradigm without displacement, it's really a paradigm for good planning. We can call it anti-displacement planning, but we could just call it good planning, that we have care for the communities that we serve, we prepare for the future, we engage with people to ensure that we're extending the benefits in our community to everyone. So we can click forward, think about, and hopefully I think you have access to this as a printout, so perhaps you can see this text a little bit more. One is really being able to assess the context that we're acting in. So we can do that with data analysis, with mapping, with understanding what are the specific vulnerabilities in our community, where are those people located, and what are we doing, what are we getting ready to do in those locations. We can understand housing needs and change with all the wonderful tools of data analytics that your planning department has. Second, that when we begin to make our plans, we do engage with the community so that we understand the needs and aspirations. That when we are talking about change and development, that it is for the people who are here with us today. And particularly understanding those folks who have not been well connected and well served by the public sector and by planning in the past to ensure that we're not glossing over any communities who have needs that we might not notice. Third, we then talk about strategizing to align tools that we have to that context. So regulatory, incentive, partnership tools. We might be thinking about planning ahead to link our affordable housing funding to a new transit extension. We might be thinking about realizing, hey, there's a bunch of naturally occurring affordable housing, low-cost rental housing here. We want to make sure those folks can stay in place. What's a subsidy? What's an incentive that we can create with the owner of that housing? We want to think about helping folks to buy their homes, perhaps, partnering with community-based organizations that provide financial education. Thinking about kind of what are the financial or regulatory incentives to shape private development in the direction that we would like it to be, and that often we can find partners in the private sector who would like to contribute to our communities in that way, who want to see the places that we are in and that they also live in grow and change in ways that support everyone. And then finally, we got to keep it up, right? This is not a one-time only thing, but to continue to monitor and track changes as they happen, to continue to update our strategies, and understand more about needs as they evolve. We are really talking about, in planning today, thinking about how to, again, balance our aspirations, our visions for our communities in the future, and to be welcoming genuinely and accessible to new folks, and also ensure that people who are here now get to make choices, get to have their aspirations and visions realized, and to balance those things together. And that would be how we describe our new paradigms around equitable and inclusive development without displacement.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bates. Really appreciate you offering a high-level overview of that, what inclusive and equitable development without displacement might look like. We're going to pass it on to Nikatris Perkins from ODOT. Is she online? Okay.
She is.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Nikatris. You may start.
Oh, awesome. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Nikatris Perkins, and I am Assistant Director. I have the pleasure of serving as Assistant Director for Oregon Department of Transportation. Additionally, I've had the honor of researching and writing about community cultivation in small to medium-sized geographies or jurisdictions. Oftentimes in jurisdictions, we are far into creating harm and have already created some complex systems of injustice by the time we're thinking about seeking equitable outcomes, right? So as we think about infrastructure, centering equity and anti-displacement strategies, it is imperative to seeing our values at play in policy, program, and in project decisions. Many of us being government entities, really do almost all tout values that are very similar. So we want to uplift unity and healthy economies and equity, and almost always safe, healthy, and secure spaces for people to live, work, and play. So in doing this, we must be clear about for who and to what end. And unfortunately, age, income, race, ability, and language are often deciding factors for the who. So in trying to think about ways to ensure a safe, healthy, and secure community, we're also ensuring housing, which has to include home ownership. We have to ensure transportation and jobs and financial well-being and mobility. So that means access to fresh food and high quality of life sustaining wages, right? And in doing this work, it's often happening for some, and depending on geography, for many in some places. but as a government entity, we're accountable to all. So as I think about anti-displacement and infrastructure, I wanted to offer 3 things that I think are really important in terms of how that works. So one is targeted universalism. So as a country that's continuously implemented universal policies and laws, and then we offer targeted solutions to the problems that they create for certain populations, we know that neither is really working very well. Target universalism offers that if we develop universal goals and then implement strategies and tactics to get the entire population to that place, that we would be better off. We would be in a space that we actually seek to be, instead of always trying to balance who's being burdened and why and what do we do wrong. So an example is this: we are very clear that home ownership is critical to a robust economy. We know it's imperative to wealth generation and entrepreneurship and financial well-being, and all of those things are important to an entity that's creating infrastructure. So we also know, because we know that, we also know that creating low-income housing often catches people in cycles of renting, right? Usually low-income housing doesn't lead to home ownership. It catches people in a space where their income dictates their ability to access what usually is great housing in places that are desirable, that they wouldn't have access to without that income. We also know that land on which people own their homes can be susceptible to eminent domain. So those 2 things are really counter to our overall goal, which means that land grants or even home ownership protection policies are necessary in some spaces for us to reach our universal goal of us building trust with government entities, of us having the safe, healthy, and secure communities that we seek, that are committed to anti-displacement. As we grow a robust economy where all Oregonians can thrive. The second thing that I think is really important for us to consider in infrastructure spaces is investment and disinvestment, right? Oftentimes it's a verse, but we have to look at both, because both are happening. In our work, we're faced with budgets that have less resource than goals, values, plans, desires. And so we're consistently balancing budgets, shifting funds, aligning to priorities. And when we think about where to invest, it's important that disinvestment, that movement of funds, doesn't decrease desirability for where our population lives. Specifically, again, thinking about some of those demographics such as age, income, or race and ability, or language, right? We need to ensure that the cost of living is not increased where people are currently residing to the point that they can't afford to live there anymore. And we have to think about climate equity, right? So that we're not putting populations in spaces where they can't breathe, live long, physically healthy lives because of air quality or materials that are used inside of infrastructure production long term. In doing that, we need to take into consideration those who have been historically excluded from both problem definition and solving. So sometimes we're thinking about, well, we have a great idea and we want to move over here, but we didn't ask the people if that was a problem that we needed to solve. If we all figured out the problem, we didn't ask them about the best solution for it at all. So when building strong infrastructure, we really need to think about not only who benefits, but we have to think about who's burdened, and not how many are burdened. So we know that in Oregon, the population, depending on where we are, vary drastically, and the largest pocket of diverse population are under 18. When we think about infrastructure, that's who we're building for, right? Like infrastructure, the things that start today, some of them won't be done for 5 years, and they're gonna last for 100. So we need to be thinking about that population as we think about who is burdened, and not necessarily how many. Sometimes it might only be 10%, but 10% is a lot when we're accountable to all. So it's not thinking about is anyone in this room burdened, in any room I would be in, not this one specifically, or the percentage, but more importantly, who and how and to what extent, because it is important that we do think about, no matter what the percentage, how they're being burdened, especially when we're looking through an anti-displacement lens. So thinking about both investment and disinvestment consistently. And then finally, I think it's important to think about community cultivation as a strategy. We've looked at community development historically. So we thought about, how do we build a robust economy? We put these infrastructure, we put these types of strip malls or housing or restaurants, or how many, we really think about what kind of road and how bike lanes, we think about all of those things in terms of what that would mean for development and it looking developed and being accessible to not only people who are desirable, not only for people who live in the state, but also for people who would visit, right? And unfortunately, we've also thought about urban renewal or used urban renewal as a model in the past. Community cultivation expects that from engagement to problem-solving methods to metrics and evaluation to contractors, so who's actually doing the work once we have a plan, and consultants and zoning and subsidies, that all of those that live and work and play in a community are not only consulted, but they're co-creators and collaborators, right? Oftentimes the answer for anti-displacement dwells among the people that we're seeking to ensure don't get displaced. And the work to cultivate those relationships and utilize not only their voice, but their experience is imperative to our long-term success. I will say that I think that anti-displacement strategies are not always comfortable because it asks that our positional power is redistributed in many ways. And that is, but in that discomfort lies the community we seek to be a part of. And so as we think about how to best build infrastructure, again, not for us as we think about tomorrow or the day after, but we're building infrastructure that's gonna last 20 to 100 years, depending on the type and the materials used, that all of that process affects those who are not at the table in many spaces, both now because of their ability or language or their income or their race, but also not because of their age, right? They're 10, they're 12. And what are we doing to ensure that populations of great diversity are being taken into consideration as we build? So private universalism is a space thinking about investment and disbursement at the same time in balance, and thinking about community cultivation as strategies, I think are very helpful as we think about infrastructure from a social equity and anti-displacement lens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikatris. I really appreciate you sharing those 3 tips. And we are going to pass it along to Carmen Madrid from MISO. And then after we hear from Carmen, we'll open the floor up for comments and questions. Do we have Carmen?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome, Carmen. Thank you for being here.
Now, thank you for having me and inviting me to this space to speak about anti-displacement. So I'm Carmen Madrid with MISO, Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon. We are a nonprofit organization working across the Tri-County with small businesses. And when I saw this, this sort of introduction, it talked about experts. And I just want to say, for the record, I am not an expert at all on anti-displacement. But what I am an expert in is working with the small businesses day in and day out and seeing really what their either struggles or challenges are in the community and in the communities that they serve. So, most recently, some of the things that I have seen, and this is not just inclusive to Clackamas County, this is everywhere, is that many of the businesses are being displaced, because of COVID, but even pre-COVID. Large conglomerate real estate factions, own large pieces of property. And so what happens is, many aspiring businesses will come to these spaces dreaming that their business will thrive there. And, we've had businesses that we've talked to that have been in business for over 20 years. They come to this country, or maybe they put in their entire savings, their whole retirement savings, really bootstrapping their businesses. And they sign a lease. They're excited about their business. They're in it maybe sometimes 5 years only, 10 years only to find out that, they're going to get kicked out. And there's a lot of factors that happen because of that. It's not necessarily because they can't afford the rent, but it's because maybe the rent or the leasing terms have changed. And sometimes because of what's happening around the infrastructure is that, transportation is shifting in that area. Maybe housing costs are going up. And so, the value of that space, and all of you know that this is a common of what happens, is that now the landlords are actually putting their leases another $5,000 on top of what they were normally paying. So these are the kind of things that we continue to see that displace small businesses. Last week alone in Clackamas County, without naming anything, any businesses, 3 businesses were displaced by a large real estate company. And one of the businesses, a nail tech salon, Vietnamese family, came here over 20 years ago, and really they had nothing. They're leaving a war-torn area and wanting to start a new life, really the American dream. I myself I'm a first-generation immigrant, so I can definitely speak about the struggles when people do first come here. And really, they put everything they had. It was the only thing they knew how to do in terms of skills development. They created the sacrifices for their family so that they can go ahead and give their children a better education, a better quality of life, and all the things that we hear about, only to find out that they got displaced after 20 years in a business, 20 years. And so they had over 15 employees. And so if you want to talk about workforce development, not only did it displace the business, it also displaced all of those families earning an income from that business. Many times people talk about workforce development in terms of, employment in a workforce, such as a, corporate setting, for example. But I think what we fail to recognize is that many small businesses actually do employ a large workforce. And just imagine what that trickle-down effect looks like, especially if this business were employing, others where this is their primary source of income for their family. So now you can kind of see how just one displacement of a business can ultimately affect multiple families and the housing and all of the things that this can do. And I guess I find it incredibly ironic that a lot of times we talk about keeping it local. Keeping it local, buy your products local, but are we actually creating built spaces where things are local so that we can have that conversation with the landlord and say, hey, let's take a look at how we can support what's happening here and continue to develop really a community where folks have lived, played, and worked. And so this is what I see on the ground every single day. The work that MISO does in terms of how we can create strategies is really the one-on-one work that we do with our clients. And sometimes it's as simple as education. The first time that somebody asked me my opinion about built spaces, or I think what were some of the other words in here? Built spaces and zoning and GIS and planning and built environments. I had no idea what people were talking about because that's not the language that businesses speak. What businesses speak is that they want to make money, they want to be profitable, they want to stay in the community, they want to employ locally, they want to employ folks that don't necessarily have the chance to be employed outside of a small business. And so, when you hear those things, businesses don't know. They just want to succeed. They just want to have a positive bottom line. And so, in terms of, strategies and whatnot, I'm not here to offer any kinds of solutions, but I do know that one thing that does work is collective impact strategies. And when a community in itself, and it might be a little altruistic, I'm not sure, but when a whole entire community works together and they want to achieve the same goal, then regardless of whether you're coming from housing, transportation, business, you create an entire community. And this is, I think, what we're lacking. I know that in studying, I was trying to figure out why did suburbia even happen? And it was actually because of the auto industry. They wanted us to drive further away from systems so that their industry could be supported. And so when you start thinking about that, how cool would it look like if we had local markets that we can just walk to? And you can see how the health component ties into all of this as well. So that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm seeing on the ground with small businesses. I think there is an opportunity for any county, any municipality to make a difference in the way that they build and develop economy for the local community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen, and thank you to all of our speakers. Again, this is an opportunity for education on anti-displacement, so I want to open it up for comments from our Board of County Commissioners and or questions to the speakers that are here today.
Commissioner Schrader, you're up.
Yeah, I have a question because I know that here in Clackamas County in the past that we've worked with community land trusts in order to maintain, it's a strategy, and so I'm wondering where that fits into all of this, as one of the strategies that we should be using a little bit more assertively, and how that maintains affordability in housing.
Would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. Community land trusts are a very excellent strategy for housing, and they can also be used for businesses,
Right.
for commercial space. So for those who are not as familiar, a community land trust would be an organization that owns and holds the land under a building. And for housing, if I were a home buyer, I would be purchasing the home, but I'm not purchasing the land. The land remains held in common. And you can buy and sell that home, and typically they'll limit the amount of equity that you get out of the home if you sell it, when you sell it to the next person. So the idea is the home would be permanently affordable. Typically, the next buyer would be income limited. I would get a certain amount back from my down payments that I've made and the like, so that you are still having that wealth building function of home ownership. But rather than the home just going into the market at the wild prices and bidding wars that we're seeing right now, it would be restricted. And then likewise, for a commercial property, it would be possible to do something very similar. So this story of a salon being displaced, that person would be actually purchasing a business unit or renting a business unit within a nonprofit structure that would be more supportive of long-term stability. So it really kind of takes pieces away from that speculative bidding war market in the real estate market. And it can be really effective. For example, in Denver, they use a community land trust around their light rail extensions. So as they know a light rail is being extended, there's often a lot of land set aside for building the tracks, for building the station areas, for staging construction that is owned then by the transit authority or by the state. They will turn those lands over to a community land trust. Or if they see a commercial building or community institution that is up for sale, it's using some public money to purchase that and hold that, to turn it over to the community land trust, so that community spaces, small businesses, daycare centers, recreational facilities, et cetera, can be preserved in those key moments of sale. And so that it is a growing strategy. There's a national technical advisory group called Grounded Solutions that supports communities to develop a community land trust strategies that I think is very effective in helping to see how to set it up, what tools to use, what targets to have in terms of homeowners, renters, businesses, how to price things. And so I would, definitely encourage availing the county of those resources. They're wonderful resources.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that, because I do know that not only do we have a dearth of affordable rental housing, but it's really home ownership that enables people to build wealth in the end and potentially really have equity so they can really, have steady jobs and things of that sort. So a follow-up to that, I'm going to look at Chair Smith here. Urban renewal. It seems to me that urban renewal can either go two ways. We can either, and some people are a fan and other people aren't, it can gentrify, or in the case, and I'm looking at our planners in the back, just to maybe one of them could talk about what are some of the strategies that we used when we did Overland Park, because that was an area that was sinking into poverty. It didn't have the infrastructure. There were road infrastructure, and particularly sewer infrastructure was at the point where there were septic systems failing everywhere. But I remember we intentionally went in to say, we want to help that community, but we don't want to gentrify. Dan, have any of you folks you were here, I think. Have you got anything to add? What were some of our tools and strategies that we used? Because I think it's relevant that we've got a track record, actually, of how we've managed this before.
Commission Chair Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development. Yes, actually, you talk about urban renewal. It's developed. Those programs that we do are developed around the plan that's developed with that community engagement. And that particular plan had a specific focus on stabilizing the housing environment out of that particular area. And by doing so, we developed programs which are facilitated sewer extensions for sewer services because folks were losing their housings because they were on septic systems. We also established plans for home repair for those who are less fortunate. We also established first-time home buyer programs in that area and grants associated with that for folks who could qualify. Essential services or essential repair grants, so heaters, things of that nature, roofing, all those were various elements or programs that were included in that North Clackamas revitalization area.
Yeah, so we basically have a roadmap already of, as communities develop, maybe what some of the tools could be. I like to think, because I know you gave us a high level, but I think what we're mostly interested in is what are those on-the-ground tangible things? We've got an example here. Is there anything else you can add about what we really could be doing specifically with tools and in a toolkit here? In a county our size, rural, urban, suburban, and frontier.
Yes, it's a lot of different contexts. Yeah. And so one thing is really tailoring tools to a particular context. So if you've got an area where there are a lot of homeowners who could be vulnerable, then you're trying to preserve people. Some of the things I think are successful to also add on to are things like first-time home buyer, home repair is one, to ensure that those are accessible to the full diversity of people so that we don't continue to exclude anyone based on their background. And two, to have ongoing supports so that that ownership is maintained over the long term. That's actually one of the great things in the community land trust is they have been very robust to foreclosure crisis because of that. Because of the supports that the nonprofits provide to the owners in terms of financial capabilities over the long term. Likewise, for a home repair type of project, one of the things that's being piloted right now in the city of Portland is some support around financial planning and estate planning for older homeowners who are getting home repair to make sure that there's an intergenerational transfer of those properties, that choices are being made as we pass on properties. And we could also I would also think quite a lot right now about what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. So the lower cost rentals that people are living in right now, almost always without any kind of subsidy, but they are easily lost and we can't create those again. I think we probably all have a sense of the tools and the limitations, resource-wise, of building new affordable housing. It's expensive, it's small scale, it serves a very tiny number of people. And most folks who don't have a lot of money are just living somewhere. And so to the extent that we can preserve those units, we can really, double and treble our affordable housing resources. So one opportunity would be to create REITs, real estate investment trusts, or kind of quick strike funds to be able to purchase buildings when they come on the market. That could be one use of, for example, an urban renewal area where we have TIF funds to be ready to buy and sort of stabilize buildings that operate fine. right? People pay their rent, they're in the black, there's nothing wrong with it, but, often in these days, and it is often a corporate, out-of-state, multinational, private equity firm type of owner will purchase it to
Yeah.
flip. And so I think that's something to be extremely mindful of in this time. As we're emerging out of the pandemic, that many places are preparing for being able to kind of get in there before these large multinational private equity buyers come in. They are the most destabilizing landlords of all landlord types, and it's not someone who's right here that you can talk to or sit down and negotiate with. It's someone far away.
Lack of community connection.
No
Knowledge,
community
yeah.
connection, and a very specific motivation around a profit model that creates a lot of instability in communities.
Thank you. I'm going to move this along. Commissioner Savas, you're in the queue.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bates, for being here today, and Carmen and
Nicotris.
how's it pronounced?
Nicotris.
Yeah. So this has been something I've been really watching and been passionate about for a long time, and I think the most frustrating element of this for me has been that doesn't seem to be on the elected side or even sometimes on the staffing sides of local jurisdictions, the realization or the attention to what's happening here. And it compounds, going unaddressed, it compounds, and it's added to the inventory, if you want to call it that, or the number of people that are homeless today. And I remember in 2005 when I sat on MPAC, I had results of a survey basically, and saying that we are trending into poverty, and by the way, in order to help address that, we should have a strategy of which we can relieve the cost of transportation for low-income communities, and use the example that the average low-income person probably spends $2,000 a year on transportation, and if they live near transit, we could reduce their costs and they could actually survive, and they could have enough income to override the growing amount of cost of living. And so that was the model that Metro would build on. And as the time went, I was watching this. I sat on there 05, 06, 07. And I was asking people, so what are we doing about the poverty thing? There's two elements of this. People that are falling into poverty, or our economy falling into poverty. And by the way, where's it working? Where's it working that we can go to? You can point me to where you've done these transportation-oriented developments, and you generated the savings. The people that live there are still there, and they're experiencing that benefit. And so I start driving around, and I start spending time in those communities, and you know what? The people that were there aren't there. The people that they went to help, they're gone. They're somewhere, they were displaced. And the real story is, really what you're hearing and seeing today, is that their life often spirals downward. I love your analogy, Dr. Bates, about the plant. You pull a nice, good, healthy plant, you pull it out of the ground, you go to replant it. It never does so well. It takes a long time. It may not ever recover, may even perish, right? So the books have been written about the story, about this scenario of people's life once they're displaced. Same goes for businesses. I mean, you get your customer base, you get comfortable, you have your employees, and then suddenly you're displaced. Same thing happens. Your employees may not come back to work because you may be displaced in an area where they can't get to. It's a downward spiral. It adds to homelessness, it adds to poverty, and it's something that if we were more thoughtful and just looking forward about the tools, the ideas of land trust, land acquisition, and everything else to get people into home ownership, get into affordability, and be able to stay in the community that they live in is important. And communities of color have experienced this more than anyone. What was once redlining, urban renewal, the nickname for urban renewal by some of those communities is urban removal, okay? Transportation-oriented development, now a term that has been redefined as transit-oriented displacement, because really in Southern California, other examples of area, my example is where's it work, is that You have an area of high need for transit, low-income areas. You provide the transit, and then pretty soon, those with the money that want to live nearby, the market drives the prices up, and then people are economically displaced as a result, whether it's intentional or not. So it's incumbent upon, I think, all elected officials to, number one, understand this, realize it, and take the steps in advance of making these changes, whether they're zoning changes or they're transit investments or infrastructure investment in advance. That's the key. And if you don't do that, then it's like you coulda, woulda, shoulda. Well, you always say, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. That wouldn't have happened. Well, so we have that opportunity, and we ought to be more thoughtful about how we do that. And we have not. And I watched that happen all around. In Clackamas County, that's already happened. It happened in Oak Grove. We went from rents that literally doubled within 6 months of the opening of the Orange Line. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that, but it's a fact. So that I think, the cost to keep people in their homes is far less to deal with them when they're on the street and trying to put them back and deal with it. And if we really care and we really want to look at our cost, and we want to look at how our impacts to our communities, then we would take this seriously. And I think I just look at where I grew up. I couldn't afford to live where I grew up. Three different homes I lived in when I was younger. I couldn't afford to live there today because of the cost. I mean, they're for $1 million, those homes, and there's nothing special about them. They were $6,000 homes when they were brand new, little tiny 800, 1,000 square foot homes. So this is a serious issue. But just imagine that you get to a point in your life and you can't even afford to live in the neighborhood you grew up. I think it's a sad day, and people should have an opportunity to live the American dream. And there's a lot of studies on this and a lot of work that Dr. Bates, people like yourselves, have looked at and studied. And I'd really like to know, I felt in talking to people that maybe the biggest way to convey it is greater education and educating people like ourselves. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on maybe how we can spread the word or get more attention around this.
That was for Dr. Bates?
Yes.
Well, I think that, Commissioner, one reality is the people who are experiencing this already know about it and can speak to the experiences that they're having. Whether it's the business owners that Carmen was speaking about, community members who are either happy, as it sounds in the North Clackamas example, with some of the services or programs that they've been able to participate in. But to have that kind of public dialogue with folks who really see what's happening in their own communities and can describe their aspirations and their dreams for what they would like to see here. I'm always happy to come in the community and share research findings or national examples. And the folks who are here I think are the best educators with their neighbors and their community members about what is happening. But we're also always happy to have the conversation at Portland State. And, I think there are a lot of resources because this is a challenge that is increasingly being not only recognized, but taken very seriously by jurisdictions all around the state and all around the West Coast in particular with these very hot markets. And there are a lot of spaces of learning for government officials as well to learn from one another. Grounded Solutions was one, GARE, Government Alliance for Racial Equity is one. A group called Policy Link does a lot of support. National League of Cities is doing a lot of work, learning opportunities, collective learning opportunities for government officials to learn from one another in peer exchanges.
Yeah. And I've tried to stimulate that dialogue amongst our local county commissioners in our District 8 meetings, for example, a couple of years ago, and it just, there was interest at first, and then it just, and I was trying to get people to wrap wrap their thinking and maybe education around how we can get in front of that. And the homeless crisis and this situation has only gotten significantly worse since then. I think that I see a correlation between the two. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for any of the presenters today? Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, Dr. Bates. In Oregon, we have very restrictive land use laws. And so when we see encroachment of big investment dollars encroaching a neighborhood, like what happened in North Portland, for example, years ago, the new development need has very few places to go because of these restrictive land use laws. I think one of the problems is that those land use laws preclude the option of going to new potential residential areas and building new properties instead of taking over existing homes. And what happens often is, like in the case of North Portland, and this happens so many times, somebody builds a home in the 1940s for $8,000. And somebody comes to the neighborhood and offers now the grandmother $308,000. And now that home's gone. The children no longer have a family home to live in. So I think we could at least to some degree reduce the potential for displacement by pushing back on Salem to reduce the restriction on land use laws. It's got to be part of the solution.
Well, Commissioner, I guess respectfully, we disagree, I think, about one piece of this and agree about another piece of this. If we look nationally at the scope of development regulation and land use regulation, Oregon, the Portland Metro, is about median. There are locational limitations to development here. We don't sprawl endlessly into greenfields that are in many ways offset by some of the other by right land use regulations that are actually very unusual nationally. And, you know, one of the challenges that we have around housing and housing affordability is not so much how many units can we make, it's that certain parts of the metro area, certain parts of the city of Portland in particular, are just extremely popular and have seen a lot of population growth. So I think where we agree is that there's a location problem in that if we don't think about displacement from place as we think about overall regional housing supply, we may end up with an okay number of units, but we will end up with a lot of pushing out of people here and there based on income. So because we have this unique system, which in many ways supports having a more healthy region, and actually supports the growth of this region because it's one of the things that makes this area popular and as a destination to move to. It is the way that our land use is constrained. It's having access to natural areas close by the city. It's being able to have, you know, sidewalks and parks and transit and things like that. So it's a double-edged sword. But it means that we have to really redouble efforts to think very carefully about displacement and to think about ensuring that we have access. And it is one of the reasons why I strongly, speak about engaging with private sector development actors in the conversation about the adjustments that we make going forward. I do believe as a planner, I cannot will any private sector actor to think and do as I do. I must understand how they are, the constraints and choices that they have, how they're making decisions, how they understand and view the scene and the market. And again, I think that because we do have many local developers, local owners, it is possible to be in those conversations and engage around partnership and understand more about how to achieve kind of mutual goals around inclusion and equity, even within our larger system.
It's interesting. Thank you very much. Do we have, Gary?
We're out of time.
I want to thank all the presenters for coming in and giving this board a very enlightening look at displacement issue, something that we can certainly gnaw and think about. And staff has been here to consider as we go forward. Our next policy session is up at 2:30. It should be lengthy, and I'm going to take a break for about 8 minutes, and then we will return. We are in recess until 2:38. Thank you.
Okay, I only have 7 minutes.
Welcome back after the recess to our June 22nd policy session. Gary, please lead it off.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Next is Park Avenue Community Project, Direction on Development and Design Standards. We have staff from Transportation and Development to present: Dan Johnson, Jennifer Hughes, and Karen Bierig. Dan, are you starting?
I am.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just a refresher again, this is the Park Avenue Community Project, basically simply to get direction from the Board of County Commissioners on the development and design standards recommended by the Projects Advisory Committee. This has been a lengthy process over a number of years, and a project identified and adopted in a long-range work program for prior years for our planning department. Not the first time you've heard about this. December 3rd presentation, which the BCC, where the board acknowledged the work of the committee, but directed some additional outreach to businesses, which included 2 additional meetings where some and/or all of you attended those, and those were facilitated by Commissioner Savas, and Commissioner Schrader attended as well. One last thing I want to highlight, this is not a final decision. This is simply gaining guidance on advancing the recommendation from the advisory committee into an additional public engagement and vetting process with the Planning Commission. That Planning Commission will then develop a future recommendation, which may be similar or not to the recommendation you see before you today, and that will come back to this board for future consideration. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Bierig to kind of run through the presentation.
We're looking forward to getting direction from you to, as Dan said, initiate the process of amending the zoning development plan and the comprehensive plan to implement the development design standard recommendations.
Just a moment. Somebody is waving at me. Whose microphone is not on? I don't know what you're saying. You're going to have to come into the room.
It's not you, it's the audio.
Oh, it was me.
Yeah. So do we have a little sign there that says "Do not touch" or you'll be electrocuted? Because every time,
That would be helpful.
I'm not going to be easily arranged.
because every time, no offense, we have a new person comes in here, they turn it off, and then other people come in and they press it. Everybody's pressing it when they should just be on. Just saying.
Okay.
Yeah. So Karen,
I'll
ahead.
just go on to the next slide.
Go on to
We're
the next
good.
slide.
So, slide 2. So before I get deeper into my presentation, I just wanted to highlight a few points. And then first, I do want to talk about the fact that this project is about change. It was started over 3 years ago. Actually, I was thinking about it. I think it was 4. With the goal of working with the community to identify the types of changes that need to be made to the development and design standards to support the area becoming an activity center. And this activity center was identified in the McLaughlin Area Plan. This also includes supporting a mix of uses that are appropriate for the area around a light rail station. So a community advisory committee made up of both residents and business owners and commercial property owners worked together for over a year with a consulting team to engage the community to create these recommendations. There were significant engagement activities that occurred throughout the course of the project. The advisory committee's charge from the very beginning with the actual application of the Metro grant was to create these development design standards to implement the McLaughlin Area Plan. So I also want to highlight that these recommended changes are for only the half mile, so it's only a small portion of the McLaughlin Area corridor. And so we're not talking about all of McLaughlin Boulevard. We're only talking about the half mile and pretty much the area that's north of Courtney Avenue. And so and here on this map, it kind of shows the area. And we're talking only about the area that is pink and orange along McLaughlin Boulevard. So it's the C3 district and the MR1 district. So while there are a host of actions, I guess finally, while there are a host of actions that could be taken to support the evolution of this area as an activity center and to support a greater number of uses there, today we're specifically talking about changes to the zoning development ordinance. So we're only talking about changes to zoning and development ordinance and the comprehensive plan that would support transitioning this area to a place that really maximizes the land around the light rail station and access to the trolley trail. Next slide. So the development design standards, as recommended by the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee, support the board, the BCC performance clackamas goals. It supports the DTD strategic plan, as well as the McLaughlin area plan. So the details are on this slide, and Dan also touched on those. So next slide. So as I noted, the project has a long history. In your packet, there were materials that were presented to the board back in December. So let's see, and then that's when the Park Avenue Advisory Committee gave the full presentation to the board about the project and their recommendation. The development design standards recommended by the Park Avenue community are the changes that are needed to the ZDO. And so in December, the board accepted their work. They asked us to do this additional outreach to the businesses, and they also wanted to move forward with the discussion about countywide anti-displacement. So it was kind of a nice partnering that we had the presentation just earlier about anti-displacement, so you guys can have a broader idea of what is meant by anti-displacement strategies. As a part of this project, we also had a memo that was specifically kind of gave guidance to the actions that could be done in partnership to support anti-displacement in the area. So today, actually, that was the action that was taken in December. So next slide. So this also gives you just kind of a different kind of view of the area and the area where the recommendations are being applied. I'm just going to reiterate, it's the area north of Courtney in the C3 and the MR1 area. So this kind of gives you a different visual of that. Slide 6. So the advisory committee made a suite of recommendations related specifically to the development design standards. So those changes, the guidance that they recommended, and I'll read them all, is one, they recommended increasing the residential density in the area, allowing for more types of small-scale manufacturing, scaling building design and site design to match the streetscape, to be able to create this active street design, prohibit new auto-oriented uses and self-storage, and that's within the permitted uses within the zoning. They also recommended that in the medium-density residential, the MR1, to allow cottage cluster, and that's a smaller type of unit at double the densities, at higher densities, and really that's kind of one of the biggest changes in that MR1. Really, they had a very focused change in the MR1. Also, for the C3 and the MR1, they were looking at requiring new pedestrian and bicycle connections, and then also modifying the on-street or on-site, on-site parking requirements. So that was the full suite of recommendations they made related to the development and design standards. So overall, there's been support for the work of the advisory committee and the recommendations. But there was one primary point of contention that kind of came up, and both came up right at the end of the process. And so the past board was presented with a petition about this concern about limiting and prohibiting auto-oriented uses. And that was part of the reason why the board asked us to go out and talk to the business owners. So we went out and talked with the business owners, as Dan mentioned. There were 2 forums that occurred over the past 6 months. And so let's see, next slide. So there were 2 meetings major concern, auto-oriented uses. And so just kind of what the current status is, so you understand, is currently, if we look at the different uses in that area right now, 12 of the 40 commercial uses, so nearly a quarter, maybe more, or less than a quarter, maybe a fifth, are actual auto-oriented uses. So there are quite a few happening in that area right now. There are other uses also that are occurring in the commercial district. By moving forward with the recommendation proposed by the advisory committee, those uses that are currently there now that are auto-oriented would change into a non-conforming status. So they would not be required to stop. They could continue their use, and they could actually, that use could be done by a different owner. So that is a kind of a tool that we use to be able to support both kind of the future evolution of an area, but support those existing businesses. So let's see. In your packet, there was a table that we provided on page 3 that kind of outlined a couple of different options. It's really about providing you with the opportunity to talk about what direction you might want to give to staff about moving forward. So the options that are outlined in that table 3 really are about moving forward with the Park Avenue, the Community Advisory Committee recommendation. And they specify kind of the uses and being able to start the process related to the zoning development ordinance changes with the Park Avenue Community recommendation. The option 2 really is about saying, well, maybe there are some uses that we want to actually retain that are auto-oriented, and those being the uses that are currently there right now. And then the third option really is about just not making any changes to the permitted uses in that area. So we really have provided this with you for a starting place for your conversation. So I only actually have one more slide. This is an opportunity for you to talk and ask us questions. So let's see, next slide. So staff does recommend that the board move forward with the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee recommendation and move forward that recommendation onto the Planning Commission and use that as a tool for additional input and to receive the Planning Commission's formal recommendation. We're here to answer questions, to provide more information. If you have questions about what the non-conforming use status is, we can get into that more detail. And we can also help facilitate the conversation about what uses should potentially be prohibited or not within that 1/2 mile. So again, just the 1/2 mile area around the light rail station. So with that, I think I will stop my presentation and we're here for questions. I think that the options that we're looking for you to move forward, the development design standards into the public hearing process to amend the ZDO and the comprehensive plan.
I thought this had to go to the Planning Commission.
Yes, that's what initiating the process of moving those forward to the Planning Commission.
I have some comments I'd like to make, but Commissioner Savas here in the queue.
Well, go ahead, Chair Smith.
Well, that's all right, you can.
Okay. If you all indulge me a little bit. So back in December 2nd, we met, and, we had recognized somewhat, we get a kind of flood of inputs from a lot of folks. And as Karen kind of outlined, there was a point of contention, I guess. And as more information came out, we were able to absorb that. I think we got a better idea following that, and also with the two discussions we had with the businesses back in March and April, I believe. So I want to thank Commissioner Schrader for helping with that. I want to thank staff for helping with the outreach to set those up. We heard from them directly. And I just want to clarify, there's obviously some misunderstandings. I don't think any of it's intentional, but there are, substantial misunderstandings along the way. But, I think it's fair to say that the businesses, once they learned of the restrictions to their property, they really worked hard to get themselves organized, to gather together and in a short time frame to try to respond to those, understand them and respond. And there was a little bit of time that was granted to the business representative on the Park Avenue Committee, but not enough time. And then by the time it came to December 2nd, there was no other opportunity to speak to it. So we've learned a lot. And, you know, I won't say I'm torn. Maybe it is the right word, but it is very difficult. I mean, I feel that through this period of time, you know, 8-9 months, I've heard there's not one side, there's not two sides, there's a lot of different viewpoints on this. And I would say that a lot of folks don't fully understand it either. And I would say of all those different viewpoints, I think that's somewhat universal. But I just want to point to that this has been somewhat anguishing and also disappointing to some degree, because I think there has been opportunity for the community to come together and resolve these last few issues. And maybe they do look like option 2 in the packet on page 3 that Karen just referenced. Maybe it does look like that. I don't know, because we haven't had the opportunity. I appreciate you all doing this. This is a great middle ground perhaps, but I don't know, right? It's not, I haven't had an opportunity to discuss that, or have they had an opportunity, but the businesses in the community and everyone else. And I just thought it would be really appropriate at this point in time, or then when we learned of this, to get MAP-IT, who supported this project in the beginning before it ever got going. They were part of this, and we've relied on MAP 1, MAP 2 to MAP-IT to get to where we are today. And they're not structurally there because the Oak Grove Community Council went on a hiatus for a while until August, as I understand the letter that we got this weekend that I sent you copies of to make sure you saw that. But in that letter, it states that that MAP-IT supported this. And if you read the November 30, 2020 letter, which I included in your email today, thank you, Everett, for sending that to my colleagues. You know, you'll see in the 1, 2, 3, the fourth paragraph that there were some issues that, like Karen's expressing, expressed in there. And also you'll see in the fifth paragraph, in the last sentence, it states this: last Saturday's McLaughlin Area Business Alliance email arrived after this particular committee had finished the report, which is really the following pages of the MAP-IT November 30, 2020 document. So it's evident they were really trying hard, to everyone's credit, to come together and try to understand what they had before them. And you know, I just wish there had been a little bit more time for them to work through that then. I think there's an opportunity to work through that today if they choose to come together. I'm just disappointed that there's a reluctance to actually do that. In my 24 years of community involvement, I don't think I've ever experienced a situation where the community that I live in has not been willing to come to the table. A lot of them are, don't get me wrong. There's just some that won't. And that's a little bit, you know, just to say that's a little bit disappointing. I sit here today, very awkward, not knowing what my community really wants. Very similar to the Oglo Bridge. Because there I was represented, I wanted to know what people thought, and I went to the community, and I asked them, I stood up in front of the room, and I said, my opinion doesn't matter, it's your opinion that matters, please tell me. And I've made that plea 3 times, twice in person, you know, and once via email to the chair. I know that COVID-19 has compromised public involvement during this period of time. That's unfortunate that no one's to blame for that. You know, it's evident that the plight of those impacted is not well understood by those who are not seeing these zone changes, whether they're nearby residents, whether they're business owners or property owners. So I know that and have confidence that everyone participated in good faith, and I know they spent hours of time, their own personal time, to get forth. And you know, I think there's some people want to see this go forward as is, and I know that some people want to see it just completely die, and I'm neither of those two, in the sense that I want to see the community tell me what they want, so when it gets to the Planning Commission, they can focus on the details and make sure we get it right. I wish more people, as is recorded, I wish more people that are watching here today listen to the previous session here just an hour ago on displacement, because it had a lot to do with what we're talking about here today. As the chairperson of MAP 1, which I was, I can attest to the hundreds of hours and labor-intensive work it is and how hard it is to bring a community consensus. And when we needed more time, at the time, staff, Clackamas County staff granted that time, and we had the ability to get where we need to get. We got consensus. Can't always get there, but you can get majority consensus. It's just painful to hear, frankly, certain groups criticize other groups for, somewhat saying that, oh, at the last minute they did this, or at the last minute they did that. But really, the critical information on the restrictions came really in the 11th hour. So we need to understand that. So I don't know where to go today.
Thank you.
I would
Commissioner
frankly like
Savas.
to see it, frankly, just go to the community, resolve a few of these issues, and then send it to the Planning Commission from there. Thank you.
I am, like Commissioner Savas, a bit torn on this. And Karen, I appreciate your presentation today and the work that you've done. And you talked about the community as offered input. I'd like to define community on this, because the inputs that we're getting, they're all over the board. I do not see a clear consensus that this board could take on a project that is this large, with the lasting impact that is this large, that we could take today and represent the greater good of our Clackamas County citizens. And that's always my default position. I'm trying to find out what the greatest good of this project is, and for the life of me, I can't. If you prohibit the existing uses that have been there since the beginning of time, I see how that fails the greatest good. And there's a lot of criticism around the auto dealerships. Well, somebody has to sell cars. That doesn't mean we can't have a coffee shop or a nail salon or a hair salon. But when you have language that I see in here, I have a lot of difficulty with that. And your slides, I have an extreme amount of difficulty with that. I would like to see more coexistence, and I don't. I see one group pitted against the other. I see the home builders wanting to have density and vertical housing at the cost of what? I see people wanting sidewalks where they can ride their bicycles, and really nice parks with white picket fence. At what cost to a county whose budget is going to project to be flat just to be able to hold our own over the next several years? So I today do not think that it is prudent or whatsoever for this board to consider anything but option 3. It's not to say if we were to pass this to the Planning Commission, I don't even know what the poor Planning Commission would even do. They would be inundated with the same dissension that we have been inundated with. We have emails here from special interest groups, and this email, and this email, and this email. I just don't see how we can pass anything today, and I'm in agreement with Commissioner Savas on that, and I see 2 other commissioners in the queue. Commissioner Fisher, I believe you were next.
So is there an option of bringing the group back together again to talk about this one issue and get clarity? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
I'll take it. We do not guide or direct the work of MAP-IT. They are an independent body. And so we are not in a position, we have helped them in the past as they've developed guiding principles, and as they've worked through staff from PGA has helped them. And it involves 3 independent community entities. And so that group would want to have a conscious effort to come back together.
Can we look at that? I mean, can we ask them?
Well,
I sent them a letter, which I copied you on, commissioners, and one of the members declined to do that, of the 4 members groups, 4 membership. 4 members of the group, one of them declined to join, which means there's not a quorum to continue business.
Okay, so which was the group that didn't want to show up?
Oak Grove Community Council, yeah.
And is there any chance they might change their mind? I mean, I'm just wondering about a pathway through. My kind of thought, so I'll just tell you what I'm thinking. I think this has been going on for so long, far before I was a commissioner, that it's important that and there's so much effort that's gone into it from so many people, and there is a lot of consensus points that have been reached. There is the point about Karen has talked about, and there's also a concern about, we just had a talk about displacement, and there's displacement of people in housing. There's also displacement of jobs, and there's the potential of not having those living sustainable jobs because some of the uses are sustainable jobs. And so my thought would be if we could frame for the Planning Commission, it's sort of a take on option 2 of making certain exceptions for the businesses that provide sustainable jobs right now.
Exception for businesses that I didn't hear.
I think the language is that sustainable jobs, the language has changed from family wage jobs. Is it sustainable? Gary, help me, somebody. Karen knows.
I would say provide for family wage jobs.
Okay, so family wage jobs, whatever the new term is.
Self-sufficiency standard that you put in your board goals, that's the
Yes.
language.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I knew that you could pull that out of our placard.
That's why we have them on the tables, except not on your tables.
That's what I would like to see go to the Planning Commission, and with the suggestion that they encourage more community engagement to wrap this up.
Thank you,
have this done.
Commissioner Fisher. That's,
And I don't know if that's possible. I guess that's a question I have.
it's
That is
noteworthy.
that public, oh, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
Noteworthy. Commissioner Schrader is up next.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank the staff, because I think, this is like the third fourth map it? How many map-its have we done since 2003?
It's a journey.
Yeah, it's a journey. It's a long
journey.
journey, and it's not over yet. So what I've been picking up on, if I can just be pretty direct here, there seems to be 2 factions here. The business community doesn't feel listened to, and there's another group of folks that want to see the change there. And frankly, I think that we have done everything we can to try and bring them together. At this point, I would strongly suggest if they wanted to see something happen, they need to do it outside of our purview and decide what it is they want. We'll have the document here, but right now I'm not prepared to take an action on it because, this has been kind of consistent with folks there. We kind of get, close to something and then one group doesn't like it, the other group loves it, and it's kind of like it's an untenable position for the commission, and it's an untenable position for our staff, because we should not be the super mayors of that area, and that's kind of what we are consistently asked to be. And I'm going to strongly suggest that if folks want to see something happen, whatever those groups are, and I've listened to the business community, and I always listen to the community planning and all these other folks, they're just going to have to tell us. And I would suggest right now not burdening the Planning Commission with anything, because I honestly think it's going to be just a boondoggle. And this is not to say I think that staff, you've done it's just so hard to finally get here and just say, hey, if those folks can't work it out, I don't know what else we can do.
I kind of tend to agree, Commissioner Schrader. Commissioner Scholl's in the queue.
Yes, Mr. Johnson, if this was approved, what is the build-out timeline? 20 years, 30 years?
That's a direct correlation to the market.
Right.
So essentially, you have a number of properties there that have high redevelopment potential. And so I think that redevelopment pace is going to be dictated by what properties and when. Mm-hmm. And so I can think of 2. One is essentially almost bare ground. The second is occupied by a larger facility that possibly may look to redevelop, that has a larger section of land. And I would assume those may go earlier than the rest of the project as a whole. But a lot of the elements that are found within the code, and correct me if I'm wrong, are supplementing that or are making those. We have talked about pro formas when you develop a project, about how it's the cost and it's the revenue you can make of a project. these changes increase the profit mark, not the profit, but the revenue that comes in to make the performance more possible or more likely. And so it assists in doing that, which would then increase or speed up the development rate.
Right. But a project this size is going to take quite a long time.
I would assume it would take some time.
Yeah,
20,
my
30,
guesstimate,
40 years.
20 years, 30 years.
Yep.
So the impact of change on the businesses and the people there is going to be incremental over a long period of time, I would think. Now, so I'm leading up to this.
Okay.
As I read through all this input from people in the area, the one thing that comes back is the objection to the restrictive wording about some of the limitations on some of the businesses, in particular the car businesses. What would happen if those restrictive words were left out and that free market was able to do what it wants? Meanwhile, the project goes through planning, it goes into effect, and we start this long process of building out a step at a time so that in 2055, we drive through there, get out with our cane, and we see a built-out project that really didn't happen with a whole lot of trauma to the current businesses and people there. For example, when it comes to displacement, someday, somebody who's living in one of the houses we're concerned about being bulldozed to put a apartment building in there, that person's going to get $800,000 for their house someday, the house they paid $20,000, $25,000 for back in the 50s. You see, so the impact of the development over a long period of time is not going to be particularly drastic, I think.
If those uses were allowed.
Right, yeah. So what I'm saying to you is I like the Park Avenue idea, but I like it with no restrictions on free enterprise. I don't know if you can wrap your head around
Can
that.
I try to answer your question?
I don't know if
Yeah.
one makes the other difficult, but I think if we could do that, go back to the community up there, because they're the ones who really count, and run that by them, see if we can't get the consensus that Commissioner Savas is talking about, and then come back here again. Now, you know me, I don't like to defer things. You know what I mean? I like to get stuff done like yesterday morning. But anyway.
Can I try to answer your question real quick?
Sure, you can.
Because I think that if I get down to the heart of it, it was, why are there concerns about restricting these auto-based businesses if they may have little to no impact on this area as it redevelops? And I think the concern, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, is that a number of those auto-based businesses have long-term longevity in regards to their occupancy of a site. So I made the mistake one time of saying, oh, that fast food restaurant's they're not going to be around. They'll get redeveloped in like 5 or 6 years. And those types of businesses tend to stay located in those prime areas for long periods of time. They may change chains, so it may go from a Burger King to a McDonald's or whatever it might be. But those auto-based businesses that are on those corridors rack up moderate to large pieces of property for a long period of time and allow for little redevelopment potential. I'm not saying that's bad or that's good. I'm just saying that's kind of a fundamental concern. Do you want to expand to that? Is there anything else that you'd add to that?
So I'm not quite sure if I'm adding exactly onto what you're saying, but I do want to highlight the fact that part of this project was really to look at the uses and the appropriate uses around a light rail station and engage the community with their ideas about what they would like to see in that area. And so we have other light rail stations in Clackamas County upon which have similar kind of guidance for the uses that are allowed. So around the Clackamas Regional Center, they have similar types of restrictions, additional density that's allowed around the Fuller Road light rail station. So So the recommendations coming out of the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee are not dissimilar from the other areas. So I did want to highlight that to you. I do also think that we do have, it's easy along McLaughlin Boulevard to think of it as all one piece. And the other thing about this particular project is saying, this is a unique area. This area north of Courtney is different than. And what are those things that we can do to support the fact that it is different? It has different access to transportation, it has different access to jobs, and how can we support that transition to the future? So that's part of the reason why those limiting of those type of uses that are more auto-oriented and less pedestrian-friendly, that aren't providing those opportunities for people to walk to different services and whatnot, why that's folded into that particular recommendation, versus just saying, allowing for any use to be there and let the market kind of evolve.
Thank you. So what's wrong with free enterprise? Oh, I don't know why why government continually wants to come in and clamp down on what's there. Like, now, is there any, now, educate me, and this might be a really dumb question, but is there any reason that vertical housing can't be built along some of these areas? And I'm thinking of the old Punky Scott location. What's the?
Bomber.
Bomber. There's no reason why vertical housing can't be put there in a park in the middle, correct?
Correct.
Correct,
There's no-
okay.
Under the current requirements,
The
yeah.
code will allow it, but currently the density standards are 25 units an acre. Now, you acted a week ago to lift that, so, well, to send it to the
Well,
planning commission.
and can't she
so-
come in and apply if she has a willing builder, or can she apply that and bring it to the board or the planning commission to allow for something more dense than what's currently in the ZDOs? So you're telling us, Dan, that we have to do this whole big fat zone change on all this?
We don't, I'm not saying, first of all, I'm not saying anything. This is from the advisory committee. And so I want to be clear about that. Secondly, the discussion is that we have to have clear and objective standards that apply in certain areas. And those have got to apply to, and we can choose sub-areas like we're doing right now in these little specific areas, but those objectives have got to apply to everybody. So there's no latitude in our current process to do a one-off where one individual landowner comes and asks for more from you.
Why not? Is that a state law, or is that our rule? That's what I get so continually frustrated at, time after time, when we're looking at zoning. And you and I, and you and you and I have had so many discussions on this. Metal siding, lot line adjustments. Okay? I don't understand why, as a government, we can't be more flexible for the people who want to come in and invest. Why can't we be more flexible with our current plans of the people who want the little park over here in the R3 area? But those little people, from what I understand, don't want any more auto dealerships in there. Frankly, I don't think they have the right to say that. And I don't think the auto dealerships have the right to say, oh, we don't want parks there either. And what I don't understand is why we can't coexist. And if government is the leader in this, then we need to be more flexible and not have the language that's in here. And I understand this has come from da-da-da-da. That's why I do not think this board should approve anything today. Paul, you're in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do share, some of Commissioner Smith's frustration about us being more nimble, if you will, when, there's opportunity comes across. And I'm not going to challenge that. I can see in the packet there's a recommendation somewhere, whether it's this one or the last one, where what we're doing here has to go to DLCD, is that correct? LCDC?
We have to notify them of code amendments. That's a legal requirement.
Okay.
But DLCD isn't going to have a problem, I do not think, with this particular proposal, because it doesn't really implicate state land use laws. If you want to provide more flexibility, just in a general sense, there may be ways to do that, but you have to amend your code to do it. I recognize it's not your code, but it's the code that's been built up over 50 years. So to make it more flexible, we have to change those rules. And there's any number of ways that could potentially be done if the board wants to explore that.
Yeah, and I can also understand that in order to defray the cost and the labor and all the time it would take for staff to do it, these one-offs, if we did something like that, Chair, would cost, a lot of money, and I'm sure that would be an impact, the soft cost for any developer to develop it. But so I'm going to start off my notes. I wanted to kind of just address something that maybe Commissioner Schull's not aware of, that in this area, there's a lot of homes that are not owner-occupied. Say that they're not owner-occupied, they're rentals. So it's the rental market where the greatest risk of displacement happens. If there's an opportunity to raise the rents, then, that's what helps. And also apartments in the area as well. And so I wanted to say that. The other one is that what I agree, I think Karen touched on it, what I agree with, is that, and I think even Commissioner Schull said it as well, this area has potential. I mean, there's a way to capitalize on the investment of the light rail station that's there. There is those opportunities. I mean, and we're seeing some of that start to take place at the Green Line. What station is that?
Fuller.
The Fuller Road Station, thank you. The difference between these two areas is one's highly concentrated with housing, the Orange Line, Park Avenue, and where Fuller Road Station is, not so much. So there's a far less risk of displacement at the Fuller Road Station than there is over here. But there is potential there, and I think there's an opportunity to capitalize it. That's why I really want to see everyone get together, and maybe that's where it ends up. That would be a good thing. And maybe we can come back and move this on to the Planning Commission at that time, if that's where we go. The other thing I think that needs to be done here, and going back to the first session here for undisplacement, and I think Dr. Bates spoke to it, is that when you do these projects, you really need to do an assessment and find out what your vulnerabilities are when it comes to those lower income and all those at risk, and a number of other factors. And there's a number, even marketing factors, that assessment of what, for example, how many of the properties are owner occupied, how many are not. What are the income levels? What's the risk for that if, God forbid, a mass displacement? But I just want to put that out there. And Jennifer, you touched on the point that the actions getting to, whether it was either Commissioner Smith, I think, asking about those changes. What we did do last Tuesday does add the opportunity for density. Can you just speak to that a little bit so that my colleagues can
So
equate the two together?
there's an overlap between the Housing Strategies project that you considered a week ago and the Park Avenue project. It's a fairly narrow overlap, but there is. In two areas, residential density. So as I said, currently in the C3 zone, the density is capped at 25 units an acre. But what you authorized us to move forward last week is to go up to 60 units an acre. That would apply in this area as well as other areas in the county. The proposal here, I think, is no maximum density, so it would be even higher. But regardless, up to 60 would be incorporated in that other project. The other thing is the parking requirements. So we talked about at least a modest reduction potentially in the parking requirements for multifamily development. That would also apply in this area. So there will be some changes possible here just as a result of the Housing Strategies project. This Park Avenue project goes farther. And frankly, the most significant thing it does beyond the residential density and parking issues is this prohibition on auto-oriented uses. And that obviously is causing the greatest consternation. That is also the greatest potential, in my view, for change. But as you said, it's not necessarily free market change. It's being controlled by the regulations.
Let's see, who's next? Martha or Schull? I don't know.
I think I was. Am I, Commissioner Schull?
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify something. We're talking about the zoning ordinance change and the comprehensive plan. Is there any vision on, we're not talking about a master plan community. We're talking about a comprehensive plan.
Correct.
Okay. The question is this. Has there been any discussion about limiting the flow of traffic on 99E in any of this?
No, it's a
No.
state
Okay.
highway.
No impact to that. There's no additional restrictions.
Okay, good, thank you.
Commissioner Schrader.
So I see this less as a land use problem as more of a governance problem. Because when Commissioner Savas said the green line where the redevelopment happened, at least in Milwaukee, I'm assuming, Commissioner, is that where you're talking?
North of the town center, so it's that unincorporated area.
Okay, that's unincorporated, but then the redevelopment in Milwaukee is under the umbrella of a city. All the redevelopment, for example, on 99E that's going north, okay, they've got the stop in Milwaukee, and then when the infinite wisdom, they've moved it to an unincorporated urban area, which kind of went against our policy at the time of not continuing to urbanize areas because, again, as the government, we don't have the skills to be a city. So I see this not just as a land use issue, I see it as a governance issue of a large group of an unincorporated urban area that, for all intents and purposes, should be a city. There seems to be a growing need for that. Whether or not people will go there, we tried to have that conversation back in 2004, if I recall, and it was a big no. But part of the issue then is that we become the governing body for an area where there has consistently been lovely people, folks, residents, love them all, know them all, that cannot seem to come to a point of consensus. And so the monkey consensus is always on our backs and essentially is always putting our staff in the middle of, whatever this issue is. So there's two things we can do. Take no action today and just say, I'll give you two options. Take no action today and let the folks know that aren't agreeing that somehow they need to come to a consensus with whatever process they want to come with if they want to get back to us. Please, staff, don't get involved this time. It's making you crazy, okay? Am I right? It's crazy sauce right now. You've worked all this hard, you're logical. This is emotional stuff, so it's not you. Or what we can do is we can just punt it to the Planning Commission and let all the folks who agree and disagree with what we have now just duke it out at the Planning Commission level.
Thank you, Commissioner Schrader. We have another commissioner in the queue, and before that, I'm going to make a motion that we accept option number 3. Before I get a second on that, Shannon, is that Commissioner Fisher in the queue?
It is.
Go ahead, Commissioner Fisher.
I would be in support of supporting option 2 with a recommendation that we provide exceptions for businesses that provide family wage jobs. That would be where I would be with this. I would not support option 3. I have been in communications with, as best I can, the Oak Grove Community Council. That's what I'm doing right here. I have Valerie Chapman, who's from the Oak Grove Community Council, saying that she is good with coming back to the table and will facilitate bringing the community back together to continue working on this, which I think is good, that they are working to plan that. If we send this on to the Planning Commission, then they can do their work and they can build their consensus and they can present that to the Planning Commission. But I'm concerned about us in our role as the Clackamas County Commission. We are the governance body for this area, if we like it or not. That's our job. I want to thread the needle. I think staff has done a really good job in helping us think through that. We need to do both. We need to help this community plan, but we also need to support our family wage jobs and businesses in not having over-regulation in their land use planning. So I will be in support of either option 2 with that caveat.
Oh, thank you. I'm not in support of option 2. It's just too nebulous, Commissioner. We have 2 more commissioners in the queue. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear, Commissioner Fisher, what you just shared, if there's a willingness to come back to the table. The table, I think, that I think is balanced is MAP-IT. You got the business community on one side, you have both CPOs, you got a balance of people, And if there's been a change of heart about that, or interest in doing that, or whatever it may be, I'd be for that. I guess which really means that we wouldn't take any action today and just allow them to work it out and come back at a future date. So that, there's not an option here in the packet that speaks to that choice there. But I'm reluctant to send it to the Planning Commission until some of these details get worked out, because I think there's a lot of detail around other factors that are more technical, and having this other thing is just going to make it more complex. So I think there's some easy stuff to do if the community can do that, and there's not the vitriol that gets to the Planning Commission that I think kind of blows it up and confuses it. So that's what I'd prefer to see. I just want to know that I'm sure we're not going to get 100% of agreement on whatever they come up with, but I think they get far closer than they are today. And if there's some softening on the sides, we just need more clear. And we've put a lot of confidence, by the way, in MAPIT and their decisions. We did the lighting project. We did a number of good work, a lot of good work out of that. So we've bought into that. And I also say that if you look at some of the things that have happened in the community, we haven't had any issues. We got a lot of consensus around the Concord Library project, and that thing's moving forward. So we've resolved, and made a lot of progress. But there's that's ever evolving and a lot more to do, but I'll stop talking.
Thank you very much. I have two more commissioners, Commissioner Scholl, and commissioners, let's be brief as we continue.
Commissioner Schrader, when you're talking about getting consensus and you use the word "they," is MAPIT the "they" you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to clarify that, yes.
Okay.
MAPIT and the groups need to get together. The question is, they need to do it
Okay.
themselves right now, and we can pull this back and wait until they come to an agreement, rather than, as you said, sending it to the Planning Commission and having it blow up.
Okay, good. I agree. Okay.
That would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Are you finished?
Good.
That's
Ken,
it.
are you finished?
I'm finished.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion today, and that motion is this. I'm going to move that we take no action on this. And if the outside groups can get together without taking such harsh sides on this, if it wants to be community-driven at some other point, then maybe next year this board could consider this. But I move that we take no action on this today.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion has been made by Chair Smith and seconded by Commissioner Schrader. Do we have any other comments? Gary?
So just to confirm that if you do approve this, staff is going to pause indefinitely on this project. They will not do any further action until the community demonstrates to you, commissioners, that there's some form of consensus, and then you will direct staff at that point. But staff will do no further work on this.
That's
I think that is
essentially-
absolutely fair. Now, I'm not saying the project is dead totally at this point. If the community wants to get together and frankly start agreeing on it and quit expecting, I'm going to hope they're listening, quit expecting to go fight and then have mom and dad being the 5 members of the commission trying to figure out who's on first base. It's not going to happen on this particular board, because I don't think that's how we want to operate. It's very unfair of the community to put staff in the position that they have put them in. I don't like it. So they need to get together. I do not want to see any current restricted uses of what's going on out there. And I think our zoning and our planning needs to be more nimble and flexible in going forward, letting the free market take over, and that includes housing. I mean, free market just isn't business. Free market is affordable housing and all this other stuff. So any other questions or comments on this?
No, I just hope the community can pull it together, because from my perspective, this has been, it makes me heartsick because it's been going on a very long time.
It
frankly,
has.
And I just don't know what else to do about it anymore.
I don't either. Thank you. So with that in mind, Shannon, would you please take the poll?
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
No.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-1. I want to thank staff for all your work. And I do apologize that we could not get further on your recommendations today. but it's just not going to work for us. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.